It was a typical busy morning at the airport. Passengers were hustling through the terminal, dragging their luggage, sipping coffee, and checking their phones. Among them, Chuck Norris walked casually toward the gate. Dressed in a simple jacket, jeans, and sunglasses, he blended in with the crowd. But anyone who looked closely could see his calm, confident presence, an aura that silently demanded respect. Chuck had a long day ahead. He was heading to a private event, but had decided to fly commercial, enjoying some downtime among ordinary travelers. As he approached the boarding gate, the attendants greeted him politely, handing him his boarding pass. He smiled and walked toward the plane without any fuss. Once aboard, Chuck followed the aisle, looking for his seat. 14C, it said on his boarding pass. As he approached, he noticed a woman sitting firmly in the seat. She was mid-30s, holding her phone, completely unaware of who was about to ask her to move. Chuck calmly tapped her shoulder and said politely, "Excuse me, this is my seat." The woman looked up, startled. "Oh, I'm sorry. I thought this was mine," she said, but her tone was defensive, not apologetic. She refused to get up immediately, clutching her handbag as if the seat was a prize she could claim forever. Chuck chuckled softly, not losing his composure. "I understand. Boarding can be confusing. This is 14C, he said, pointing to the seat number. Passengers around them had started noticing the interaction. A few eyes turned toward the commotion. Some murmured quietly, while others discreetly pulled out their phones. There was a tension in the air. Something about Chuck's calm demeanor made it impossible to ignore. Even without any dramatic gestures, the energy in the aisle shifted. The woman crossed her arms. "I've been sitting here first," she said sharply. Her words hung in the cabin like a challenge. Chuck paused, smiled gently, and said nothing yet. What happened next shocked every passenger on the plane. The cabin was quiet except for the low hum of the engines and the occasional shuffle of passengers settling into their seats. Yet, the calm was about to be disrupted. Chuck Norris stood politely beside the woman, his eyes steady, his presence commanding without needing to raise his voice. "Understand, ma'am," Chuck said, his tone calm but firm. "This is my seat, 14C. Could you please move?" The woman's eyes narrowed. "I've been sitting here first. You can't just take my seat." Her voice carried a mixture of indignation and disbelief. It was clear she wasn't used to being told no. Passengers nearby began to notice the interaction. A man in the row across whispered to his friend, "Who is that?" Others subtly recorded on their phones, sensing something unusual about the calm figure standing in front of the upset passenger. Chuck, undeterred, remained composed. "I'm not trying to argue. Boarding can be confusing. Here's my boarding pass," he said, showing it briefly. The woman huffed, clutching her handbag tightly. "It doesn't matter. I'm comfortable here. You should find another seat." Chuck's patience was remarkable. He smiled lightly, keeping his voice steady. "Ma'am, I promise, no one is asking you to leave out of disrespect. It's just my seat." Whispers spread quietly among the other passengers. Some were astonished by how calmly he handled the situation. Others, still unsure who he was, watched with curiosity. The tension in the aisle was palpable. The woman's defiance grew, but she seemed slightly unsettled by Chuck's unwavering confidence. "Look," she snapped, "I don't care who you are. You can't just take someone's seat." Chuck tilted his head, maintaining eye contact, radiating calm authority. "You're right. I can't just take someone's seat. But if you check the boarding pass, you'll see it's assigned to me." Passengers started glancing at their phones. Some quietly whispered, "Something's off. Who is he?" A few recordings began circulating mid-flight, the atmosphere thickening with suspense. People were drawn in, not just by the argument, but by Chuck's serene dominance in the situation. At this point, a flight attendant approached, trying to de-escalate. "Sir, ma'am, please," she began, but Chuck gently raised his hand. "I appreciate your help, but I've got this under control," he said respectfully. The woman glared, clearly frustrated that the man in front of her refused to escalate or argue. Her body language shifted, arms crossed, tapping her foot, but Chuck's calmness seemed almost magnetic. Even the flight attendants couldn't help but notice the contrast between his composure and her agitation. Then Chuck took a step slightly closer, still smiling. "Ma'am, may I ask, if this seat were yours or someone else's, wouldn't you want the same respect?" A hush fell over the cabin. His words, simple yet powerful, resonated with everyone watching. Passengers leaned forward in their seats, some holding their phones in suspense. Even the woman paused, unsure how to respond. "If you were on this plane, what would you do? Stay calm like Chuck or argue like the woman? Comment below and tell us which city or country you're watching this from." The woman, momentarily speechless, opened her mouth, but no words came. Chuck's calm authority seemed to silently command the entire cabin. Other passengers began whispering among themselves. "Who is he? He's incredible just standing there." The tension escalated further when the woman finally spoke again, her voice quivering slightly. I don't know. Her words trailed off, revealing her uncertainty under the intense yet peaceful stare of the man before her. Chuck offered a final, gentle nudge. "It's okay. I'm sure there's a comfortable seat for you nearby." He pointed subtly to an empty row a few seats away. Passengers gasped softly. Some smiled at the quiet diplomacy unfolding in front of them. Others started capturing the moment, knowing it was unusual for someone to handle a confrontation with such calmness and dignity. The woman finally rose, muttering under her breath, but her demeanor had changed. She looked embarrassed but also bewildered. She had expected an argument, a fight, or at least resistance. Instead, she had encountered serenity and unwavering confidence. Chuck walked to his seat with a quiet smile. No gloating, no anger, just calm assurance. And yet, even as he settled in, the whispers among passengers grew louder. "Who is this guy? Is he famous? I feel like I just witnessed something incredible." In that moment, the cabin had transformed. What began as a simple seat dispute had become a study in respect, patience, and quiet authority. The audience, both in person and those recording, felt the tension, the mental trap, the emotional pull. Everyone watching was silently asking themselves, how would I handle this situation? Little did anyone know, what Chuck was about to reveal next would leave everyone on this plane completely shocked. The plane was now buzzing quietly with whispers. Every passenger had noticed the unusual confrontation. What should have been a simple seat dispute had transformed into a scene that commanded attention. Chuck Norris remained calm, standing in the aisle with the quiet authority of someone used to facing far greater challenges than a seat dispute. The woman, still clutching her handbag, was visibly frustrated. Her previous confidence had cracked under Chuck's unshakable calm. "I don't see why I should move," she snapped, glancing around to gauge the reactions of the other passengers. She wanted validation, an audience that agreed with her. But what she found instead were eyes fixed on Chuck, watching every word, every movement, every expression. Chuck took a deep breath, his tones steady and polite. "Ma'am, I'm not here to cause trouble. I've got a seat assigned to me, and I'd appreciate it if you would move." She scoffed. "You're acting like I'm doing something wrong. This is ridiculous. Who do you think you are?" The question hung in the air. It was not just a challenge. It was an attempt to provoke. Passengers leaned in subtly, as if expecting a dramatic response. Some reached for their phones to capture the moment. The tension was thick, almost tangible, and every person in the cabin felt it. Chuck didn't answer immediately. Instead, he held her gaze calm and measured. His silence was more powerful than any argument. The woman's words lost weight against the quiet force of his presence. She opened her mouth again, this time to retort, but Chuck's voice finally cut through, calm, firm, and commanding. "Respect is not something you take by force," he said. "It is something you show to others, no matter the situation." The cabin went silent. Passengers exchanged glances, sensing that this was no ordinary confrontation. Even the flight attendants paused, unsure of how to intervene without disrupting the powerful tension unfolding. Chuck's calmness had a magnetic effect. It drew attention, commanded respect, and silently exposed the woman's entitlement. She crossed her arms, her frustration turning into confusion. For a moment, the strong facade she had relied on began to falter. Chuck's quiet confidence and composed demeanor created a mental trap, one that forced the woman, and even the onlookers, to reflect on the absurdity of the confrontation. Whispers began to spread among passengers. Who is he? Why is he so calm? Why do I feel like he's in total control without raising his voice? The woman's defenses started to crumble. Her words slowed, her tone softened, but she still resisted. Fine, but I don't understand. Why do you get to just... Chuck interrupted gently. Because I choose not to escalate. I could argue, shout, or insist, but that wouldn't solve anything. Moving forward is always better than creating unnecessary conflict. His words carried weight. The wisdom in them struck the passengers emotionally. Some nodded subtly. Others smiled, impressed by his quiet authority. Even the woman's hands, still clutching her bag, began to relax. If you were on this plane, what would you do in this situation? Argue or stay calm like Chuck? Comment below and tell us which city or country you're watching this from. But the drama wasn't over. The woman, still a little stubborn, glanced at the empty seats nearby, trying to save face. I guess I could move, but this is still unfair, she muttered. Chuck gave her a reassuring nod. I understand. It's not about fairness. It's about respect. And everyone in this cabin deserves to feel safe and comfortable. Passengers were now completely invested. Phones quietly recorded the exchange, and whispers of admiration spread across the cabin. Chuck's calmness and ability to assert authority without aggression created a tension that gripped every single person on the plane mentally and emotionally. The story had gone beyond a seat dispute. It had become a lesson in humility, composure, and quiet dominance. Even the flight attendants, now more relaxed, exchanged glances. I've never seen anyone handle a situation like this before, one whispered to another. And then, just as the tension seemed to reach its peak, Chuck leaned slightly toward the woman and smiled gently. It's okay. Let's resolve this quietly. Everyone here will appreciate the calm. The woman finally nodded, realizing that resistance was futile. She slowly rose and moved to an empty seat nearby, still processing the intensity of the man she had just confronted. Passengers thought the ordeal was over, but little did anyone know what Chuck was about to reveal next would leave the entire plane completely stunned. The cabin had returned to a tense quiet. The woman had finally moved to an empty seat a few rows away, but the atmosphere was far from normal. Passengers still whispered to each other, phones subtly recording every movement, every word. There was a strange energy in the air, a mixture of awe, curiosity, and the suspense of the unknown. Chuck Norris calmly settled into his seat, adjusting himself as if nothing unusual had happened. Yet the calm radiating from him was magnetic, almost hypnotic. Every eye in the cabin seemed drawn to him, watching his demeanor, trying to decode the man who had handled the confrontation with such perfect composure. A middle-aged man across the aisle leaned toward his friend, whispering, I swear I've seen him somewhere. But where? He looks familiar. The friend shrugged. Maybe a stunt guy? Or a pilot? Neither could pinpoint it, but both were captivated by his presence. Meanwhile, the woman who had refused to move earlier was silent, fidgeting in her new seat. Her earlier confidence had completely evaporated, replaced by an uncomfortable awareness that she had underestimated the man before her. She shot occasional glances toward Chuck, who simply sat with a gentle, knowing smile, unaffected by her stares or whispered mutters. The murmurs across the cabin grew louder. Someone whispered, He's famous, isn't he? Another passenger added, I think he's that actor or a martial artist. Phones were subtly lifted, recording small clips of Chuck's calm and unshakable demeanor. The mental trap was working. Viewers on the plane and the online audience would soon feel the tension. Chuck noticed the whispers but didn't engage. He simply reclined slightly in his seat, radiating quiet authority. The flight attendants, though trying to maintain professional composure, were visibly impressed. One whispered to another, I've never seen someone handle a confrontation so effortlessly. Then it happened. A young passenger near the front of the plane leaned toward her mother and whispered loudly enough for several people nearby to hear, "Wait, that's Chuck Norris." The effect was immediate. Heads turned. Phones were raised higher. Eyes widened. Whispers spread like wildfire. "That's the Chuck Norris? World champion, martial arts legend. He owns those movies, right? Is he really flying commercial?" The woman who had refused to move froze. Her mouth opened, but no words came out. She had thought she was confronting an ordinary passenger, but now reality struck. The man she had tried to dominate in a simple seat dispute was one of the most powerful and respected figures in the world of martial arts, film, and beyond. Chuck remained calm. He didn't raise his voice, didn't boast, didn't even smirk. Instead, he simply acknowledged the whispers with a subtle nod. The tension in the cabin intensified, not from aggression, but from astonishment. Passengers were mentally trapped, caught between admiration, disbelief, and suspense. Some passengers whispered among themselves, "Can you believe she argued with him? I'd be terrified to be in that position." Even standing quietly, he commands respect. Unbelievable. Even the flight attendants exchanged glances, now fully aware of who they were dealing with. Their awe only added to the charged atmosphere. Chuck's calmness contrasted perfectly with the woman's unease. She realized, perhaps too late, that her defiance had been misplaced. Yet she still didn't speak. Her pride kept her silent. If you were sitting on this plane and realized you were arguing with Chuck Norris, what would you do? Would you apologize, freeze, or quietly move? Comment below and tell us where you're watching this from. Chuck's quiet authority had turned a simple dispute into a lesson in composure, humility, and mental dominance. The suspense had reached its peak. Everyone in the cabin, and everyone watching online, was waiting for the next move. What would Chuck do? How would the woman respond? The answers were about to leave every single person stunned. Passengers thought the story had reached its climax, but Chuck Norris was about to reveal something that would leave the entire plane completely speechless. The cabin was electric with suspense. Every passenger's eyes were fixed on Chuck Norris. The woman who had earlier refused to move sat frozen, unsure whether to apologize or continue clinging to her pride. The murmurs and whispers had spread throughout the plane like wildfire. The atmosphere was tense but charged, not with anger, but with anticipation. Chuck leaned slightly forward in his seat, his calm gaze sweeping the aisle. His presence alone commanded attention. It was clear, this was a man who had faced far greater conflicts in life than a simple seating dispute, yet he handled it with the wisdom of experience, not force. He finally spoke, his voice calm, strong, and commanding, but never aggressive. Respect is something that should never be taken by force. It is not demanded, it is earned, and it is given freely. The words struck the passengers like a shockwave. Heads turned in astonishment, and even the flight attendants paused, unsure of how to respond. The woman's face shifted from defiance to disbelief, her earlier confidence now crumbling. Chuck continued, his tone firm yet composed. Arguing, shouting, or trying to dominate someone will never make you right. True strength is shown in how you treat others, in how you remain calm under pressure, and how you uphold dignity, both your own and those around you. The cabin fell silent. The low hum of the engines seemed to fade away as passengers absorbed his words. Phones were held higher now, recording every moment. It was no longer just a seating dispute. It had become a lesson in humility, composure, and respect. A few passengers whispered to each other, "Wow, even standing quietly, he commands authority. I've never heard anyone say that so calmly yet powerfully." The woman's reaction, she doesn't know how to respond. The woman shifted uncomfortably in her seat. Her defiance was gone, replaced by a stunned realization. She had underestimated the man before her. Chuck's calm had not only diffused the conflict, but had also mentally and emotionally trapped her. There was no aggression, no shouting, only undeniable authority and presence. Chuck's voice softened slightly, carrying a hint of compassion. This isn't about seats, nor about who gets what. It's about how we treat each other in every situation, big or small. Every person deserves respect, and that includes you, just as it includes me. The impact of his words rippled through the cabin. Other passengers began nodding subtly, some murmuring affirmations, others looking at the woman with silent acknowledgement of Chuck's wisdom. The tension had transformed into admiration, awe, and reflection. Even the flight attendants exchanged impressed glances. One whispered, "I've never seen someone turn a confrontation into a life lesson like this." Another quietly added, "He's teaching without even raising his voice." The woman finally opened her mouth, her voice barely audible. "I'm sorry." Chuck nodded graciously, his expression calm and forgiving. "Thank you. That's all anyone could ask for." The cabin relaxed slightly, but the intensity lingered. Chuck's ability to maintain control, assert moral authority, and command respect without raising his voice had left a mark on everyone present. Every passenger, whether recording the scene or quietly observing, felt mentally and emotionally engaged, trapped in the moment, reflecting on the power of composure, respect, and quiet authority. If you could respond to someone disrespecting you like Chuck did, would you stay calm or react impulsively? Comment below with your reaction and tell us where you're watching this from. As Chuck finally settled into his seat, there was a collective shift in the cabin. The whispers softened, replaced by quiet admiration. Passengers exchanged glances, some smiling subtly, others still recording. The woman who had refused to move now sat in silent contemplation, a mix of embarrassment and newfound respect on her face. Chuck's calm demeanor and unwavering composure had completely changed the energy on the plane. What started as a minor dispute had transformed into an unforgettable lesson in humility, patience, and authority. Passengers thought the confrontation was over, but the final reveal was about to leave everyone completely stunned, proving that Chuck Norris didn't just win the argument. He won the entire cabin's respect. The cabin had quieted to an almost surreal stillness. Chuck Norris sat calmly, his composed demeanor radiating authority, wisdom, and an aura of unshakable confidence. The woman who had refused to move earlier still fidgeted in her seat, her previous defiance now replaced by a growing awareness that she was facing someone extraordinary. Then it happened. A flight attendant approached discreetly, whispering something to the woman who had taken the seat. The woman's eyes widened, and she froze mid-breath. She glanced back at Chuck, the weight of realization slowly settling in. Passengers around her leaned in subtly, noticing the change. Some whispered quietly to each other, their curiosity now tinged with astonishment. "Wait, did you just find out who he is? Is that Chuck Norris, the martial arts legend, the man in the movies?" Chuck remained calm, almost serene, his lips forming the faintest smile. He didn't need to announce anything. His presence alone had commanded attention. The whispers grew louder, and soon the entire cabin had caught on. People were now fully aware that they were not witnessing an ordinary passenger asserting his seat, but the incomparable Chuck Norris himself. The woman, realizing she had argued with one of the most iconic figures in history, gasped. Her face flushed bright red, her earlier arrogance completely stripped away. The mental and emotional trap had closed around her. She had underestimated him, assumed her position of control, and now she was utterly humbled. Chuck leaned back slightly, his eyes scanning the cabin. He spoke calmly, with a tone that carried both authority and humility. "Everyone here deserves respect. It's not about power, status, or fame. It's about how we treat each other, even in the smallest situations." Passengers around the plane nodded subtly, their phones quietly recording, their whispers filled with admiration rather than judgment. Some whispered, "I've never seen anyone handle a situation like this." She's speechless, and rightly so. Even without raising his voice, he commands respect. The woman finally found her voice, barely audible. I didn't realize. She trailed off, unable to complete her sentence. The embarrassment was total, yet there was a hint of admiration in her eyes now. Chuck's calm response further cemented the emotional impact. He didn't mock her, didn't gloat, and didn't raise his voice. Instead, he simply nodded and said, "It's okay. We all learn from our mistakes. Respect and humility are lessons for everyone." The effect on the cabin was instantaneous. Passengers, who had initially been curious onlookers, were now emotionally invested in the story unfolding before them. They had witnessed a simple dispute transform into a masterclass in composure, confidence, and moral authority. Mentally and emotionally, they were captivated, some in awe, some quietly reflecting, all thoroughly engaged. Even the flight attendants, who had tried to remain neutral, exchanged impressed glances. "I've never seen someone handle a confrontation like this," one whispered, and without raising their voice. "Have you ever faced someone who completely outclassed you with calm authority? What would you do in this situation? Comment below and tell us which city or country you're watching this from." The woman slowly turned her head, acknowledging Chuck with a quiet nod. Her defiance was gone, replaced by respect and awe. The entire cabin seemed to hold its breath as Chuck settled fully into his seat, radiating calm power. At that moment, someone whispered from the back of the plane, loud enough for everyone to hear. She argued with Chuck Norris. She didn't even know it. The cabin erupted in a mix of laughter, murmurs of amazement, and discreet applause. Chuck smiled faintly, the epitome of quiet authority. The reveal had done more than just humble the woman. It had completely transformed the energy of the cabin. Every passenger was now mentally and emotionally caught up in the story. Phones captured every subtle expression, every whispered exchange. Social media would soon explode with clips of the encounter, but in the moment, everyone was fully present, fully engaged. Chuck's calm demeanor and moral authority had won the day, not through aggression, but through patience, composure, and quiet confidence. The woman, now humbled, had learned a lesson in respect that went far beyond a seat dispute. Passengers thought the confrontation was over, but what happened next would make this story go viral worldwide. By the time the plane touched down, the story of the seat dispute had already spread throughout the cabin like wildfire. Passengers quietly exchanged smiles, some still shaking their heads in disbelief at what they had just witnessed. The woman who had refused to move earlier now sat in reflective silence, clearly humbled but also enlightened by the experience. Chuck Norris remained calm, collecting his belongings with the same composed demeanor that had captivated everyone from the moment he boarded. Phones in the cabin were buzzing with activity. Videos of the confrontation had been shared in real time, clips of Chuck's calm authority and the woman's stunned reaction circulating instantly. Comments and captions expressed astonishment, admiration, and inspiration. He didn't even raise his voice, and she froze. One viewer typed, "Respect is truly earned," another commented. Within minutes, the story had transcended the plane, making its way across social media platforms worldwide. The narrative wasn't just about a seat dispute anymore. It had become a lesson in humility, composure, and moral authority. People across the globe were sharing, discussing, and reflecting on the encounter. Many admitted that they had been mentally and emotionally captivated by the way Chuck handled the situation, recognizing the rare skill of asserting power without aggression. News outlets picked up the story. Headlines highlighted the viral incident. Chuck Norris turns a seat dispute into a lesson in respect. Woman humbled by martial arts legend on flight. Calm, composed, and unstoppable, Chuck Norris teaches humility in the sky. Even outside the viral videos, discussions began on forums, podcasts, and talk shows. People dissected every part of the encounter. The woman's initial arrogance, Chuck's calm and authoritative responses, and the mental and emotional lessons that unfolded. It wasn't just entertainment. It was an inspiring moment for millions who watched, prompting reflections on how they dealt with conflict in their own lives. Back in the plane, passengers left with a new sense of awareness. The woman quietly approached Chuck as the cabin emptied, offering a sincere apology. Chuck nodded, smiling faintly. "It's okay. Respect is a lesson for all of us," he said simply. There was no boast, no prideful assertion, just humility and wisdom. The moral resonance of the event extended far beyond the physical space of the plane. Clips of Chuck's calm authority were shared across continents, drawing millions of views and comments. People debated how they would respond in similar situations. Viewers were mentally and emotionally engaged, many reporting that the encounter left them inspired to handle conflict with composure rather than aggression. Have you ever faced someone who completely outclassed you without raising their voice? What would you do in that situation? Comment below and tell us your city or country. In the days that followed, the viral footage became a case study in leadership, patience, and respect. Social media users created compilations of Chuck's calm responses, highlighting the mental discipline and emotional control that made him so remarkable. Motivational channels analyzed the interaction, praising the subtle mastery of authority without confrontation. Chuck himself stayed humble throughout. He did not seek attention or acclaim for what had happened. Instead, he used the opportunity to spread a simple but powerful message. True strength is not in dominance, but in how you treat others. Respect is earned through calm, dignity, and integrity. By the time the story reached global audiences, millions had learned from a simple yet profound encounter that had begun with a seat dispute and ended with a universal lesson in respect, humility, and composure. The mental and emotional trap that Chuck Norris created, the combination of suspense, calm authority, and moral clarity, had ensured that viewers were not only engaged but inspired. If you believe respect and humility are more powerful than anger and aggression, type respect in the comments and subscribe for more insane, inspiring real-life stories like this one. The incident had gone far beyond the plane. It had captured hearts and minds worldwide. A simple moment, a seat dispute, had transformed into a timeless lesson, leaving everyone who watched mentally captivated, emotionally moved, and deeply inspired. Chuck Norris had won not just the seat, but the admiration and respect of millions, quietly and powerfully.